Welcome to Act Out. I'm Eleanor Goldfield, and this is your tipping point. So, I'm not really a fan of the term migrant caravan because it sounds like an attraction at a state fair or something. What this is a refugee march. These people are leaving their homes out of desperation, a desperation carved out of our capitalist hegemony, both politically and ecologically. Most of the refugees are fleeing Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, countries that found themselves squarely in the crosshairs of our decades long freedom crusades and School of the Americas style violent political interference in Central and South America. In El Salvador, for instance, the U.S. spent more than $6 billion on direct military assistance to El Salvador's repressive regime. We maintain military bases in ravaged Honduras, the country with the highest murder rate in the world. Back in the 1980s, we trained Contra guerrillas in Honduras in order to attack the Sandinistas in Nicaragua. In 2009, when a coup overthrew the democratically elected President Manuel Zelaya in Honduras, the leader of the coup, Honduran General Romeo Vasquez Velasquez, was a graduate of the notorious School of the Americas. Not to mention that then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton played an important role in preventing Zelaya's return to office and the junta consolidating its power in the face of massive nonviolent protests. Because fuck all that nonsense with new schools and subsidizing public transportation, raising the minimum wage, providing pensions and scholarships and more. That sounds an awful lot like commie talk to me, and we just can't have that. Speaking of which, according to now unclassified CIA documents, the U.S. vis-a-vis the CIA helped organize a coup in Guatemala in 1954 to overthrow their democratically elected government because they were red. What this means in terms of policy was that Guatemala had made a move to end exploitative labor practices. But this threatened our interests, like the United Fruit Company, which held sway over a lot of land in Guatemala. Now, 1954 might sound like ancient history, but the reverberations of our violent meddling in Guatemala are still felt today. As Elizabeth Oglesby, Associate Professor of Latin American Studies at the University of Arizona, put it, the war in Guatemala was really a genocide. She added that an estimated 200,000 were killed in the subsequent 36-year-long civil war, which stretched from 1960 to 1996. The history is important because it went so far beyond anti-communism. The purpose was to destroy people's vision of the future. It had a terrible impact on the country. Hundreds of thousands of people were displaced. Indeed, the history is important because without it, how can you possibly understand the present? These refugees are refugees from wars that we have ownership in. A war that is still raging as we continue to try and desperately quell leftist movements in Central and South America. And as the capitalist machine lashes out in rabid force against any and all dissidents, a beast of its own creation ravages alongside it. Robert Albro, a researcher at the Center for Latin American Latino Studies at American University, told The Guardian in a recent article that people are moving because they don't have anything to eat. This has a strong link to climate change. We are seeing tremendous climate instability that is radically changing food security in the region. This is reminiscent of some of the same reporting around the crisis in Syria. Severe drought and food insecurity pushed rural populations into cities where the lack of government programs and people-focused policies led to escalating dissent. Back in Central America, migrants shared stories of how low or no-yield harvests pushed them to join the march north. One farmer talked of extreme drought, several years without rain, ultimately decimating his crops, and therefore his ability to care for himself and his family. Many farmers have also been affected by the coffee plant epidemic leaf rust, which has spread across Central America since 2012, hitting 70% of farms. Warmer temperatures allow it to thrive, whereas previously cold nights would have killed it off. Meanwhile, lower prices for crops compound the already oppressive conditions agricultural workers face. And when a third of all employment in Central America comes from agriculture, any shift in economic or environmental standards has devastating effects, as we now see. And thanks to the political destabilization that we've helped design, when farmers move to cities in their own country, they risk their lives battling everything from gangs to continued military violence. Hence, the move abroad and north becomes a last resort worth trying. As one refugee, Antonio Lara, put it, "I didn't leave my country because I wanted to. I left because I had to." Put yourself in that position. Your government is toppled, a violent dictator takes the throne, you live in poverty without any of the socialized programs previously available, but you just manage to get by as a farmer. But then the winds literally change, no rain comes, crops die by the ton, your livelihood shattered. You go to the city to seek any form of work, only to be met with gang violence, military oppression, and no work. Would you leave the country? Would you try whatever it takes to provide for your family? I can't think of one single damn human being who'd say no. And yet our country is filled with people who look on with a blend of fear and disgust as these refugees near our border. We watch as somewhere between 5,000 and 15,000 troops are sent to fight unarmed refugees who, by the way, are still more than a month away. It's so twisted and backwards. First of all, were it not for a combination of our authoritarian and violent foreign policy and our role in perpetuating global climate change, the roads currently crowded with refugees would be all but empty. As anarchist writer and orator Voltairine de Cleyre wrote more than 100 years ago, the hells of capitalism create the desperate act desperately. Which brings us to the second point. These roads are filled with refugees. So, what can we do about it? Well, first of all, we have to shift how we think about this whole situation. Viewpoint Mag recently published a brilliant piece on just this concept that examines the caravan as a tactic, a way to bring solidarity and community into the common yet often solitary act of migration. The caravan strategy is predicated on the hope that the attention of others, the populations of the world, and not the governments, will ultimately provide a measure of safety. And this addresses yet another powerful aspect of this tactic, visibility. Not just surface visibility that, yes, it's thousands of people moving together, but that this moving is both the antithesis of a system built on divide, conquer, separate, and oppress, but also a defiant response to it. Migration itself, especially in the caravan's notable collective and democratic form, is a political challenge to the capitalist state and a refusal to accept the conditions of exploitation offered in the capitalist system. Already, by choosing to migrate collectively, by determining its own route, the caravan evades and defies the migration industry, the coyotes, police, gang leaders, etc., who directly profit from this mobility, and instead relies on the self-organized support of the communities it encounters on the way. The caravan form itself, by turning a very everyday and quotidian occurrence of migration into a spectacle, is directly staking a political claim by making the invisible or ignored into the visible. It is forcing a response from politicians, but more importantly, from the people. The initial report was 800, then 5,000. Now, as I mentioned, up to 15,000 troops may be at the border to confront these refugees. In an open letter to active duty soldiers, anti-war veterans Rory Fanning and Spencer Rapone opened simply, "Your commander-in-chief is lying to you. You should refuse his orders to deploy to the southern U.S. border should you be called to do so." The letter goes on to outline why this order should be refused and ends with a call for soldiers to organize and resist together, to lay their weapons down. It is undeniable that this caravan is forcing a response. And we've seen responses like the veteran letter. We already know what our government's response is. The question is, how will we respond? Those within geographically defined borders of the U.S. state must seek to amplify the point that is already suggested by the very existence and visibility of the caravan. That the people migrating have a claim to justice, have a claim to solidarity, and that they are already part of a broader American community insofar as their political and economic existence is inseparable from the political and economic operations of U.S. imperialism. This is not a matter of the inside looking out. We are all a part of this capitalist, colonialist, imperialist shit show. We're just at a slightly different point on their board game. It follows then that our response will be a collective one. Our response will affect our future just as much as it affects theirs, because we are the people. We have far more in common with those walking than those signing orders to send troops to stop them in their tracks. Therefore, our present response must reflect a future that we want to be part of. A refusal to process this event through a looking glass of fear or violent repulsion, but also a refusal to relegate this event as a footnote to the supposed strategic core of electoral work. Instead, a true domestic alternative insists on considering that maybe we are not who we thought. As the Chilean song goes, El pueblo unido jamás será vencido. The people united will never be defeated. To learn more about the march, visit pueblosinfronteras.org.